Gigabit Technologies occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the financial district, and I'd spent the last 2 years watching my reflection in those windows grow more tired, more resigned. I was a senior analyst in the Enterprise Solutions division, which meant I translated technical specifications into language that executives could pretend to understand. The work wasn't difficult. It was merely endless, like filling a bathtub with a teaspoon while someone else kept pulling the drain. My days blurred together in a rhythm of conference calls, spreadsheet updates, and the particular brand of workplace politeness that requires you to smile while someone takes credit for your work. I'd learned to expect nothing, which made disappointment impossible. That kind of emotional efficiency kept me functional. Gigabit sold data infrastructure solutions to Fortune 500 companies, and our pitch was always the same: seamless integration, scalable architecture, future-proof systems. The reality involved significant growing pains, occasional outages, and a support team stretched too thin to respond to everything. But that wasn't what we told clients during the courtship phase. My boss, Carolyn Vickers, had been with the company for 8 years and ran our division with the confident ease of someone who'd never faced real consequences. She was sharp, well-dressed, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to redirect blame. Her laugh was frequent and loud, especially when she was making someone else the punchline. The office culture reflected her style. Morning meetings featured jokes at the expense of whoever had made the most recent mistake. Performance reviews weaponized minor infractions. Vacation requests were approved with theatrical sighs about team commitment. I'd watched 3 people quietly quit in the past year, and nobody asked why. There was someone new in the division, though I hesitate to call him new since he'd been there almost 6 weeks. His name was Oliver Quan, and he worked in a contract capacity doing system audits and compliance documentation. Nobody paid much attention to him. Oliver was slight, probably in his early 50s, with graying hair he wore a bit too long and glasses that seemed perpetually smudged. He dressed in clothes that looked expensive once but had since faded into that category of well-worn professional: blazers with pills on the elbows, dress shirts with frayed cuffs. He carried a leather messenger bag that sagged with the weight of file folders and a laptop that was at least 2 generations out of date. He kept to himself mostly, arriving early and leaving late. He sat in the corner desk near the emergency exit, and I'd noticed he brought the same lunch every day: a sandwich in a reusable container, an apple, a thermos of tea. He took notes by hand in spiral notebooks, which seemed quaint in an office where everything was cloud-based and collaborative. People made assumptions about Oliver. The younger staff treated him like he was invisible, brushing past his desk without acknowledgement. Carolyn had made a few jokes about the audit guy during team meetings, suggesting his role was a formality required by corporate rather than anything important. Once, she'd asked him in front of everyone if he needed help learning our project management software, and the question had been dripping with condescension. Oliver had simply smiled and said he was managing fine. I'd exchanged maybe a dozen words with him total. He seemed kind enough, thanking people who held doors, apologizing when he accidentally took someone's seat in the conference room. But kind didn't equal important in our office hierarchy, and Oliver was decidedly unimportant. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. We had a major client presentation scheduled for Friday, the kind that could mean a 7-figure contract extension if it went well. Carolyn had been preparing for weeks, assembling slide decks that promised aggressive timelines and flawless execution. She'd handpicked the team for the meeting: herself, 2 other senior analysts, and the division's technical architect. I'd been part of the preliminary work, pulling together performance metrics and drafting talking points. But I wasn't on the final roster for the client meeting itself. That stung, though I'd learned not to show it. Tuesday afternoon, I was at my desk reviewing compliance documentation when my phone rang. It was the client, a pharmaceutical company called Helix Corporation. Their VP of IT, a woman named Catherine Park, was on the line. "Selena, I wanted to touch base before Friday's meeting," she said. Her voice carried the specific weariness of someone who'd sat through too many vendor presentations. "I've been reviewing the implementation timeline you sent over, and I have concerns." I pulled up the document. "What kind of concerns?" "The rollout schedule shows full deployment in 6 months. Based on what I'm seeing in the infrastructure requirements, that's not realistic. We'd need at least 9 months, possibly 12, to properly test and integrate without disrupting current operations." She was right. I'd flagged this exact issue in my preliminary notes, but Carolyn had insisted we keep the 6-month timeline in the client-facing materials. Clients don't want to hear about delays, she'd said. We'll adjust expectations once they're committed. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the familiar weight of a decision I didn't want to make. You're absolutely right, I said finally. 6 months is aggressive. Based on your current infrastructure and the integration complexity, 9 to 12 months is more realistic for a safe rollout. The silence on Catherine's end lasted exactly 3 seconds. So why does your presentation say 6 months? Because we want the contract, I said. But if I'm being honest, trying to hit that timeline would compromise the implementation quality. You'd be dealing with bugs, support issues, possibly system instability during your peak business periods. Another pause. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I appreciate your honesty, Catherine said slowly. That's rare in these vendor relationships. The 9-month timeline is still faster than most of our competitors could deliver, I added. And it's actually achievable without cutting corners. We talked for another 20 minutes. I walked her through a revised timeline that was realistic, explained which phases could be accelerated and which couldn't, acknowledged the limitations in our support capacity during the initial rollout. When we hung up, I felt both relieved and faintly nauseous. I didn't tell anyone about the call. Not immediately. Wednesday morning, Carolyn breezed past my desk and dropped a folder on my keyboard. Client services needs the Helix metrics by noon. Can you handle that? Sure. Great. Also, about Friday's meeting, I'm streamlining the team. You're off the roster. I looked up. Any particular reason? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Your approach is a little too detailed. Too technical. These presentations need energy, optimism. Your honesty makes people nervous. The words landed like a slap disguised as feedback. Understood, I said. Don't take it personally. You're great at back-end work. Let me handle the client-facing stuff. She was already walking away, heels clicking against the tile. I spent the rest of Wednesday working on projects nobody would remember by Monday. The office chatter continued around me, jokes about weekend plans, complaints about the coffee machine, speculation about year-end bonuses. Oliver sat at his corner desk, methodically typing notes from a stack of printed reports. Around 3 in the afternoon, I went to the break room for coffee and found Oliver standing by the microwave, waiting for water to boil in his ancient electric kettle. He had a tea bag ready, the string wrapped precisely around his finger. Selena, right? He said. That's me. I wanted to ask you something, if you have a moment. He had a quiet voice, the kind that made you lean in slightly to hear. I've been reviewing the Helix Corp proposal documentation, and I noticed some discrepancies between the technical specifications and the timeline commitments. My stomach dropped. What kind of discrepancies? The implementation schedule assumes certain integration capabilities that don't align with Helix's current infrastructure. I'm concerned we're overpromising. He pulled out one of his notebooks, flipped to a dog-eared page covered in neat handwriting. If they hold us to this timeline and we fail to deliver, we'd be in breach of contract. That's significant liability exposure. Have you mentioned this to Carolyn? I tried. She said the timeline was approved by leadership and not subject to revision. The kettle clicked off, and Oliver poured water over his tea bag with careful attention. I'm documenting my concerns in my compliance report, but I thought you should know, since you did much of the preliminary analysis. I appreciate that. He nodded, stirring his tea slowly. Sometimes I think companies forget that these contracts aren't just about revenue. They're about real relationships, real trust. When that breaks down. He trailed off, then smiled apologetically. Sorry, I'm old-fashioned about these things. No, I agree with you. Well. Back to work, then. He collected his tea and his notebook and shuffled back toward his desk. I stood there holding my coffee, watching him disappear around the corner. The break room felt suddenly very empty. Thursday arrived with no fanfare. The office had that pre-weekend energy where people checked out mentally even while pretending to work. Carolyn spent most of the day rehearsing her Friday presentation, projecting slides onto the conference room wall and practicing her delivery. I tried to focus on other projects but kept circling back to the Helix situation. Catherine hadn't called again. Maybe she was reconsidering the whole contract. Maybe she was talking to our competitors. Maybe my honesty had cost us the deal entirely. Around 11, Carolyn emerged from the conference room and made a beeline for my desk. Her expression was unreadable. Did you talk to Catherine Park this week? My mouth went dry. Yes, Tuesday afternoon. She called with questions about the timeline. And what exactly did you tell her? The truth. That 6 months wasn't realistic, that 9 to 12 months was more appropriate for the scope of the project. Carolyn's jaw tightened. You undermined the entire presentation. I answered her questions honestly. You contradicted the official timeline that leadership approved. Do you understand how that makes us look? How that makes me look? Her voice had risen slightly, drawing attention from nearby desks. I specifically told you that you were off this deal because your approach doesn't align with our sales strategy. Our sales strategy involves lying to clients? Wrong thing to say. I knew it immediately. My office. Now. I followed her into the small glass-walled room she used for private conversations. She closed the door with excessive care, the kind of control that suggested fury barely leashed. You want to know why you're not senior management, Selena? This is why. You don't understand how business works. You don't understand that sometimes you need to manage expectations, create aspiration, sell the vision first and figure out the details later. Catherine was going to find out eventually that the timeline was unrealistic. Eventually isn't Friday. Eventually is after we have the signed contract and can negotiate adjustments. She crossed her arms. But now she's going into tomorrow's meeting with doubts. Thanks to you. I'd rather have her go in with accurate information. Your job isn't to decide what clients should or shouldn't know. Your job is to support the team strategy. And you failed. She picked up her phone, typed something quickly. I'm documenting this conversation. Consider this a formal performance concern. If the Helix deal falls apart, you'll be held accountable. I left her office feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. The afternoon crawled by in a haze of forced productivity. I kept my head down, avoided eye contact, tried to look busy enough that nobody would approach me. Oliver left at his usual time, 6:30, messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He gave me a small nod as he passed. I didn't acknowledge it. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. I got to the office early, before most people, and tried to immerse myself in work that didn't matter. The Helix presentation was scheduled for 10. Carolyn and her hand-picked team gathered in the main conference room at 9:30, arranging materials and doing last-minute tech checks. I wasn't invited. Obviously. I spent the morning working through email backlogs and updating project trackers, the kind of administrative tasks that keep a company running but earn you no recognition. The office around me hummed with normal Friday energy, people making lunch plans, discussing weekend activities, counting down hours until freedom. At 11:15, Carolyn's office door slammed open hard enough that the glass rattled. She stormed across the bullpen, her face flushed, moving with barely controlled rage. People's heads popped up from cubicles like prairie dogs sensing danger. Selena. My office. Right now. Every eye in the division followed me as I stood and walked to her door. My pulse hammered in my throat. She wheeled on me the moment I crossed the threshold. Why did they accuse us of hiding details? I blinked. What? Helix. Catherine Park. She opened the meeting by asking why our technical documentation contradicted the timeline we'd been presenting. She said someone from our team had been honest with her about the real implementation schedule, and now she wanted to know why the official presentation told a different story. What did you say? What could I say? I tried to explain that timelines are flexible, that we were presenting aspirational goals, that every implementation is unique. Carolyn's hands were shaking slightly. She wasn't buying it. She said the discrepancy suggested either incompetence or intentional misrepresentation. Then she asked if we'd been similarly misleading about our other capabilities. My stomach twisted. Did you lose the contract? She's putting everything on hold pending a full audit of our previous claims. She wants verification from a third party before moving forward. Carolyn sank into her chair, looking suddenly older. Do you understand what that means? That means weeks of delays, maybe months. That means leadership is going to ask questions. That means this deal might be completely dead. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. She looked at me with something close to hatred. You sabotaged this deal. Your little honesty session completely undermined our credibility. I want you to write up everything you said to Catherine Park, every word, so I can do damage control. Okay. And stay away from client communications going forward. Permanently. You're now restricted to internal analytics only. No client contact, no presentations, no external calls. Understood? Understood. I left her office feeling numb. The whole division had heard enough through the glass walls to know something bad had happened. Whispers followed me back to my desk. I sat down, opened a blank document, and tried to reconstruct Tuesday's phone call word by word. By lunch, the story had spread. I was the analyst who'd told a major client the truth and torpedoed a multimillion-dollar deal. Colleagues avoided me in the break room. Nobody met my eyes. Carolyn sent an email to the division leadership that afternoon, CCing half the company. The subject line was Client Communication Protocol Violation, Helix Corporation. The body outlined my unauthorized disclosure of timeline concerns and characterized it as a serious breach of sales strategy that had jeopardized a critical relationship. I read it 3 times, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Nobody defended me. Nobody questioned the framing. I was the problem employee who didn't understand how things worked, who'd let naive principles override business judgment. I thought about quitting. Spent the whole weekend mentally drafting resignation letters that grew increasingly bitter with each revision. But I had rent to pay and no other job lined up. So Monday morning, I went back. The office felt different. People were polite but distant. Carolyn barely acknowledged my existence. I was moved off the high-profile projects onto maintenance work, updating old documentation, organizing archived files, creating reports nobody would read. Oliver was gone. His corner desk had been cleared out over the weekend. The emergency exit door beyond it looked bare and strange without his presence. Nobody mentioned his departure. Contract workers came and went all the time at Gigabit. I wondered if he'd finished his compliance report. I wondered if anyone would read it. October bled into November. The Helix deal remained frozen in audit limbo. Carolyn grew increasingly tense, snapping at people during meetings, staying late in her office with the door closed. The division's quarterly numbers were trending down, and rumors of budget cuts started circulating. I kept my head down and did my work. The monotony was almost comforting, safe, predictable, requiring nothing of me beyond basic competence. I stopped checking my work email after hours. Stopped volunteering ideas in meetings. Became exactly the kind of employee I'd always pitied, present but disengaged, collecting a paycheck while waiting for something better. Then, on a Wednesday morning in mid-November, everything changed. I arrived at 8 to find the office buzzing with unusual energy. People clustered in small groups, talking in low voices. The conference room that Carolyn normally monopolized was occupied, door closed, blinds drawn. What's going on? I asked Stephanie, one of the junior analysts. Leadership meeting. Been going since 7. She looked nervous. Something big. At 9 o'clock, Carolyn's assistant sent a division-wide calendar invite, mandatory all-staff meeting, 10 a.m., main conference room. No subject line. No agenda. The speculation intensified. Layoffs, people guessed. Restructuring. Maybe the Helix situation had gotten worse. Maybe we were all getting fired. We filed into the conference room at 10, filling every chair and lining the walls. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Carolyn sat at the head of the table, her face carefully neutral. Next to her sat 2 people I recognized from corporate leadership, the CFO and the head of legal. And then, at the far end of the table, sitting with perfect posture and that same worn leather messenger bag at his feet, was Oliver Quan. Except he didn't look like the Oliver I remembered. His hair was trimmed, styled. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie. The smudged glasses had been replaced with modern frames. He looked a decade younger and infinitely more authoritative. Thank you all for coming, the CFO began. I'll keep this brief. As many of you know, we've been conducting a comprehensive compliance audit of our Enterprise Solutions division over the past 2 months. This audit was initiated due to concerns about our client communications and contract fulfillment practices. My heart started pounding. The audit was conducted by Oliver Quan, who some of you may have seen working in this division. What you may not know is that Oliver is a senior partner at Meridian Compliance Group, one of the top corporate governance firms in the country. We hired his firm to conduct an independent assessment of our operational practices. The room went utterly silent. Oliver stood, pulling a tablet from his bag. Thank you. I'll outline our findings. Over the past 8 weeks, I reviewed approximately 200 client contracts, analyzed internal communications, conducted confidential interviews with staff, and documented patterns of behavior within this division. His voice had changed. Still quiet, but carrying absolute authority. We identified multiple instances of misrepresentation in client proposals, particularly regarding implementation timelines and technical capabilities. We found a pattern of overpromising during the sales process and attempting to manage client expectations post-contract through change orders and scope adjustments. He tapped his tablet, and a slide appeared on the conference room screen. Specifically, the Helix Corp proposal contained timeline commitments that were technically infeasible given the client's infrastructure. This same pattern appeared in proposals to 4 other major clients over the past 18 months. Carolyn's face had gone pale. Additionally, we documented a workplace culture that discouraged honest client communication and punished employees who raised legitimate concerns about contract feasibility. This created an environment where staff felt pressured to prioritize short-term sales over long-term client relationships and company liability. Oliver's gaze moved around the room, landing briefly on me before continuing. These practices expose Gigabit to significant legal and financial risk. Had the Helix implementation proceeded on the proposed timeline and failed, we would likely be facing breach of contract litigation and reputational damage. The legal head cleared her throat. As a result of these findings, we're implementing immediate changes. First, all client proposals will now undergo mandatory technical review before being presented externally. Second, we're establishing a new compliance oversight role within Enterprise Solutions. And third, she paused, the kind of dramatic pause that signals something major. There will be personnel changes in division leadership. Carolyn Vickers is being transitioned out of her current role, effective immediately. We're grateful for her years of service and wish her well in her future endeavors. Carolyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She didn't say anything. Just grabbed her phone and walked out, leaving the door open behind her. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The CFO continued, "We'll be appointing an interim division head while we search for permanent leadership. In the meantime, Oliver and his team will be working with us to implement new protocols and rebuild client trust. That's all for now. Leadership will be meeting with each of you individually over the next week." The meeting dissolved into chaos, people talking over each other, asking questions, looking shell-shocked. I slipped out and returned to my desk, my mind spinning. Oliver appeared at my cubicle 20 minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Can we talk?" We went to one of the small meeting rooms, the kind used for one-on-ones. He handed me one of the coffees and sat across from me. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" "The conversation we had in the break room. About the Helix timeline concerns." He pulled out one of his spiral notebooks, flipped it open. "I'd already flagged the issue, but hearing that you'd raised similar concerns helped me understand that the problem wasn't just the numbers, it was the culture that silenced people who questioned those numbers." "I lost the client deal." "No. You told the client the truth. The deal was built on a foundation of misrepresentation. It was never going to work long-term." He took a sip of his coffee. "Catherine Park called me last week, by the way. After we presented our audit findings to leadership. She wanted to verify our conclusions independently. And? We spent 2 hours on the phone. She's impressed with Gigabit's willingness to investigate and make changes. She's moving forward with the contract, with a revised timeline based on your recommendations." I stared at him. "Seriously? Clients don't actually want vendors who lie to them, Selena. They want partners who respect their intelligence and shoot straight, even when it's uncomfortable. You did that." He closed the notebook. "There's something else. We need someone to lead the new compliance and client relations role. Someone who understands the technical work but also values honest communication. Someone who has demonstrated they'll do the right thing even when it's personally costly." The implication hit me slowly. You're offering me a job? Leadership is. I'm just the messenger. He smiled. It would be a step up from senior analyst. New title, significant raise, direct report to the division head. You'd be responsible for reviewing all client-facing materials, serving as liaison between technical teams and sales, and ensuring we're making promises we can actually keep. Why me? Because during my 8 weeks in this office, I watched you do your work with care and integrity. I watched you treat people decently, including me, when most people acted like I was furniture. And then I watched you choose honesty with a client even though you knew it would cost you. He set his coffee down carefully. Character reveals itself in small decisions, Selena. You revealed yours. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight. Think about it. No pressure. We'll be in touch with formal details next week. He stood, collected his coffee. For what it's worth, you made my job easier. It's hard to build a case for organizational change when everyone's terrified to speak up. You spoke up. That mattered. He left me sitting there in the small room, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. The next few weeks were surreal. Carolyn disappeared entirely, no farewell email, no goodbye party, just an empty office and a company-wide announcement about pursuing new opportunities. The division leadership position remained vacant while HR conducted a search. Oliver and his team became a regular presence, meeting with departments, reviewing processes, gradually transforming the office culture from one of anxious competitiveness to something more collaborative. I accepted the new role. Signed the paperwork on a gray December morning that felt nothing like I'd imagined a career breakthrough would feel. No champagne, no celebration. Just a title change in the employee directory and a slightly larger desk. The work was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had to rebuild trust with clients who'd been burned by overpromises. Had to navigate internal politics with managers who resented oversight. Had to learn to say no to sales proposals that sounded great but couldn't be delivered. But I also had authority. Real authority. When I flagged a timeline as unrealistic, people listened. When I recommended transparency with a client, leadership backed me up. The culture didn't transform overnight, but it shifted. Slowly. Towards something more sustainable. Catherine Park from Helix became one of my key client relationships. We had a video call every other week to review implementation progress. She was demanding but fair, and she seemed to appreciate having a direct line to someone who wouldn't sugarcoat problems. You know what I value most about working with you, she said during one of our calls in late January. I trust you. That's rare in vendor relationships. I'm just doing my job. No, it's more than that. Most vendors tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me what I need to know. There's a difference. I thought about that conversation a lot afterward. About the difference between what people want to hear and what they need to know. About the cost of honesty in the short term versus the value it creates over time. Oliver's firm finished their engagement in February, and he came by to say goodbye before heading back to his next assignment. We had coffee in the same break room where we'd first really talked. How are you settling into the new role? He asked. It's good. Hard, but good. That's usually how it works. He stirred sugar into his tea, the same methodical motion I remembered. Can I tell you something? When I started this audit, I expected to find the usual corporate dysfunction, some overpromising, some corner-cutting, nothing systematic. But what I found here was more troubling. A culture where the wrong behaviors were rewarded and the right ones were punished. And you think that's changed? I think it's changing. Culture doesn't shift because of policy memos or new org charts. It shifts because people in positions of influence make different choices. He looked at me over the rim of his cup. You're in a position of influence now. Use it well. I'll try. I know you will. That's why you're here. He left that afternoon, messenger bag over his shoulder, and I returned to my new office, still adjusting to having an office instead of a cubicle, and looked at the stack of proposal documents waiting for review. It's been 4 months now since that Tuesday phone call. 4 months since I chose honesty over strategy and paid the immediate price. The funny thing about consequences is that they're not always immediate. Sometimes the bill comes due days later, weeks later. And sometimes what looks like a loss turns into something else entirely. I'm not going to pretend my life is perfect now. The work is demanding, sometimes frustrating. I still deal with colleagues who see compliance as an obstacle rather than protection. I still have to fight for realistic timelines against salespeople who want to promise the moon. But I go home at night without that heavy feeling in my chest, that sense of complicity in something slightly rotten. I answer client calls without rehearsing careful lies. I look at myself in those glass tower windows and recognize who I see. That Tuesday afternoon, taking Catherine Park's call, I thought I was just answering questions. I didn't know I was taking the first step toward a completely different career trajectory. Didn't know that choosing temporary discomfort over permanent compromise would reshape my professional life. I think about that sometimes, about how many small decisions we make that seem insignificant in the moment but turn out to matter enormously. About how easy it is to rationalize little betrayals, little compromises, little moments of cowardice. And about how much harder, but how much more worthwhile, it is to choose differently. Oliver was right about character revealing itself in small decisions. I'd add that careers are built the same way, not in the big dramatic moments but in the quiet Tuesday afternoon phone calls when nobody's watching and nobody will know if you take the easy path instead of the honest one. They offered me a permanent division leadership position last week. The official announcement goes out Monday. It still doesn't feel entirely real. But I think about that meeting, watching Carolyn walk out for the last time while Oliver stood at the front of the room with his spiral notebooks and his documentation of everything that had been wrong. I think about how power shifts, how justice sometimes arrives delayed but arrives nonetheless. How the person everyone dismissed was actually the person with the most authority in the room. I think about taking that phone call on a Tuesday afternoon and choosing, despite everything, to tell the truth. And I think about how that single choice, that one moment of refusing to participate in a comfortable lie, changed absolutely everything. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you in the short term. But sometimes, if you're patient and you're lucky and you work in a company that eventually values integrity over quarterly targets, it costs the people who punished you for it instead. I'm grateful I made that call. I'm grateful Catherine asked hard questions. I'm grateful Oliver was there, documenting everything, building a case for change. But mostly, I'm grateful I didn't talk myself out of honesty when it mattered. Because that's the version of this story I have to live with. And it's a version I can actually live with.